Omar grew up surrounded by love and warmth. Her parents doted on her, and their home was a place filled with laughter and joy. But when she was only 10 years old, a terrible car accident took both her parents away from her. In an instant, her life changed. The warmth and security of her home disappeared, leaving her in a state of deep loss and uncertainty. Her Aunt Serah took her in. Aunt Serah was strict, but she did what she could to care for Omar. She constantly warned Omar about the dangers of men and how they would only bring her trouble. "You're young and naive," Aunt Serah would say. "Focus on your studies. Stay away from men." Omar tried to listen at first, but as she grew older, curiosity about love began to blossom in her heart. By the time she was 15, she had fallen in love with a boy named Chuma. He was 20 years old, handsome, and had dreams of traveling abroad to build a better future. They spent their days together, laughing, talking about their hopes, and promising each other a lifetime of happiness. But that happiness was cut short when Chuma suddenly left for another country, chasing his dreams with no notice. He didn't even say goodbye, leaving Omar devastated. Soon after his departure, Omar discovered she was pregnant. She didn't realize it at first, but Aunt Serah, sharp-eyed as ever, noticed the subtle changes in her body. One evening, as they sat together, Aunt Serah asked with sharp suspicion, "Omar, are you pregnant?" Omar's heart sank. "Me? Pregnant? No, Auntie, that can't be," she stammered. But Aunt Serah was relentless. She pressed harder. "When was the last time you had your period?" Omar hesitated, her mind racing, trying to recall. The truth dawned on her slowly, like a wave crashing over her. She couldn't remember. Aunt Serah's voice thundered through the house. "Who got you pregnant?" Still trying to deny the obvious, Omar insisted she wasn't pregnant, but her aunt wouldn't hear it. She dragged Omar to the hospital for a test. When the results came back, it confirmed her worst fears. Omar was not only pregnant but expecting twins. Aunt Serah exploded in anger. "I warned you, Omar. I told you to stay away from men, but you wouldn't listen. Now look at you, 15 years old and carrying twins. What will people say about this disgrace?" Omar felt an overwhelming wave of shame and fear. Chuma was gone, and she was left alone to deal with the consequences. The weight of her mistake became heavier each day as Aunt Serah's harsh words echoed in her mind. Despite her aunt's constant criticism, Serah helped her through the pregnancy and supported her after the twins, a boy and a girl, were born. But as time passed, the resentment between them grew. Omar's life as a young mother was far from easy. She was only 15 when the twins were born, and Aunt Serah made it clear that Omar would forever owe her for raising the children. She called Omar's decision to fall in love at such a young age foolish and frequently reminded her of her failure. But Omar was determined to make things right. She worked tirelessly at a supermarket, saving what little money she earned and sending it to Aunt Serah to help care for the children. It was her way of paying her aunt back for her support. As the years passed, Omar grew into a strikingly beautiful woman. By her early 20s, she had matured into someone who caught everyone's eye. Her presence was graceful, and her beauty was undeniable. Men were naturally drawn to her, and suitors began to approach her for marriage, but every time she thought she could finally find love again, her past would rear its head, and her hopes would shatter. The first proposal. The first man who proposed to Omar was Kenneth, a kind-hearted banker. Kenneth was everything Omar thought she wanted: polite, respectful, and genuinely interested in her. They dated for months, sharing stories and building a relationship that felt real. Omar began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally have the life she dreamed of, a family, stability, and love. But as their relationship grew more serious, Omar knew she had to tell him the truth. One evening, while they were sitting in a cozy cafe, she decided to confess. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice shaky with fear. "I have twins. I had them when I was 15. Kenneth's expression immediately changed. His smile faded and a tense silence settled between them. "Twins?" he repeated slowly, as if the word itself was a foreign language. "You never mentioned you had children before." Omar could feel the distance growing between them. She tried to explain, but it was too late. A few days later, Kenneth ended the relationship, saying he wasn't ready to take on the responsibility of raising another man's children. Omar was heartbroken, but she told herself that not every man would react like Kenneth. Surely, someone would accept her and the children. The second proposal, Samuel. Not long after, Omar met Samuel, a wealthy merchant. Samuel was charming, full of compliments, and seemed genuinely interested in her. They went on long drives and shared meals at expensive restaurants. Samuel was older, more mature, and Omar allowed herself to believe that this time things might be different. When the time came, Omar told him about the twins. She braced herself for his reaction, hoping he would understand. But just like Kenneth, Samuel was taken aback. "Twins?" he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "I thought you were never married." "I wasn't," Omar replied. "It was a mistake I made when I was younger." Samuel nodded, but his enthusiasm had dimmed. A week later, he called off the engagement, telling Omar he couldn't see a future with her. Omar was devastated once again. 3 more suitors came and went, each one following the same painful pattern. Each time, Omar fell in love, hoping that this man would be the one to accept her and her children. And each time, she was left heartbroken when they walked away after learning about her past. By the time the 5th proposal failed, Omar had reached her breaking point. The rejection was unbearable, and she couldn't take the pain any longer. That night, she made a decision that would change her life. She would never again tell anyone about her twins. She called Aunt Serah and told her about the decision. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "I'm never telling another man about the twins. If I do, they'll just leave me. I can't handle the heartbreak again." Aunt Serah surprisingly agreed. "That's a wise decision, Omar. You deserve happiness. Men don't need to know everything." At the time, Omar felt a sense of relief. She believed her aunt understood the pain she had endured. But little did she know that this decision would later become the very weapon Aunt Serah would use to blackmail her. Then came Mr. Charles, a successful businessman from the city. He was different from the other men Omar had known. He didn't rush into the relationship, nor did he shower her with empty compliments. Instead, he was patient, kind, and genuinely interested in getting to know her. They met at the supermarket where Omar worked, and over time they began seeing each other regularly. Mr. Charles had gone through his own share of difficulties in life, which made him empathetic. He never pressured Omar to share more than she was comfortable with, and for the first time in years, Omar felt like she could truly be herself, except for one thing. She still kept the secret of her twins hidden, afraid that revealing it would destroy everything. As their relationship blossomed into love, Mr. Charles eventually proposed, and Omar accepted with both joy and fear. She had made up her mind. She wouldn't tell him about the twins. Not yet, and maybe not ever. After the wedding, life with Mr. Charles seemed perfect on the surface. He was loving, kind, and provided Omar with a sense of security she had longed for. However, beneath that happiness was a shadow, Aunt Serah. As time went on, Aunt Serah's demands for money became outrageous. She didn't just ask for help with expenses related to the children. She wanted luxury items like designer clothes, new phones, and other indulgences. At first, Omar complied, telling Mr. Charles that it was for family emergencies. But as the demands grew, it became harder to explain. One evening, Mr. Charles confronted her. "Omar, why do you keep sending such large amounts of money to your aunt? I've never seen any evidence of these so-called projects. What is all this money being used for?" Omar felt her heart race. The truth was threatening to come out, and she wasn't ready for it. She stumbled over her words, trying to reassure him, but Mr. Charles wasn't convinced. Omar's fear had begun years earlier, after the 5 failed proposals. Her secret had weighed heavily on her ever since. She had decided, after those painful experiences, that her twins would remain a secret. After the 5th proposal failed, she had called Aunt Serah and explained her decision. Aunt Serah had nodded in agreement, telling Omar that keeping the secret was the right choice. At the time, it had seemed like a relief. Omar thought her aunt understood the deep pain and rejection she had endured. But little did she know that Aunt Serah would later use this secret as leverage. As Aunt Serah's demands for money grew more absurd, the pressure on Omar became unbearable. Mr. Charles was already questioning why so much money was going to her aunt, and Omar feared that any moment the truth might come out. Aunt Serah, sensing this fear, took full advantage. When she didn't get what she wanted, she threatened Omar. "If you don't give me the money I ask for, I'll tell your husband the truth about the twins," she said coldly. "I'll ruin your marriage, Omar." Omar was trapped in her lies. She had no choice but to continue asking Mr. Charles for money, coming up with excuse after excuse. But Mr. Charles's patience was wearing thin. He loved Omar, but he could sense that she was hiding something from him. Things reached a breaking point when Aunt Serah demanded money for a new iPhone just to keep up appearances with her friends. "I can't ask Charles for more money," Omar pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "He's already suspicious, Auntie. Please, I can't keep doing this." But Aunt Serah wasn't swayed by Omar's pleas. "If you don't send me the money, I'll call him myself and tell him everything," she threatened. "You'll lose your marriage, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Omar was desperate. She begged her aunt not to ruin her life, but Aunt Serah was unrelenting. The next day, she followed through on her threat. Omar was at home when her husband's phone rang. It was Aunt Serah. Her heart sank as she overheard him answer. "Hello, in-law," Aunt Serah said in her most saccharine voice, but Omar knew what was coming. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while," Aunt Serah continued, her tone dripping with malice. "You see, the twins I've been raising all these years, they're not mine. They belong to your wife, Omar." Mr. Charles was silent on the other end, struggling to process what he had just heard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low and steady, though his heart pounded. "I'm telling you the truth," Aunt Serah said smugly. "Omar had those twins when she was just 15 years old. She's been hiding them from you this whole time." The world seemed to tilt for Mr. Charles. The woman he loved had been hiding something so fundamental, so deeply personal, and he couldn't understand why. After a long moment of silence, he managed to say, "I'll speak to my wife," and abruptly hung up the phone. Meanwhile, Omar had been pacing the living room, her stomach twisted in knots. She had sensed something was wrong the moment Aunt Serah called. When Mr. Charles finally walked through the door, his face was unreadable. Omar knew instantly that her secret had been revealed. Her legs felt weak, and she sank to the floor, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Mr. Charles stood there, silent, his face a mixture of shock and hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked after a long pause, his voice soft but laced with pain. How could you keep something like this from me? Oma wiped her tears, trying to calm her shaking hands. I was afraid, Charles, she said, her heart breaking with every word. I've been rejected so many times because of my past. I've watched 5 men walk away the moment I told them about the twins. I didn't want to lose you too. Slowly, Oma began to explain everything. She told him about her love for Chuma when she was just a young girl, how he left without a word, and how she had been forced to raise the twins on her own with Aunt Serah's help. She spoke about the failed proposals, the rejection, and how Aunt Serah had used her secret to blackmail her. I thought if I didn't tell you, she whispered, that maybe we could have a future together. I didn't want to lose you, Charles. I love you. Mr. Charles sat in silence, taking in her words. His hands were clenched, his face tight with emotion, but as the moments passed, he began to understand the depth of her fear. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. You should have trusted me, Oma, he said, his voice softer now but still firm. I understand why you were scared, but marriage is built on trust. How can we move forward if we're hiding things from each other? Oma sobbed quietly, her body trembling. I know, she said through her tears. I know I was wrong. I've lived in fear for so long that I didn't know how to be honest anymore. Please, Charles, give me a chance to make it right. Mr. Charles looked at his wife, the woman he had fallen in love with, and realized that despite everything, he still loved her. He let out a deep breath, softening his stance. Stand up, Oma, he said gently. She hesitated for a moment, then rose slowly, wiping her tear-streaked face. There's something you don't know about me either, he said quietly. Oma looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Charles exhaled deeply before continuing. A few years ago, I was diagnosed with a medical condition. I've been told by doctors that I'm unable to have children. I've been undergoing treatment, but there's no guarantee it will work. Oma's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected this revelation. You mean, you can't? Mr. Charles nodded. Yes, but that's why I think this is all happening for a reason. You already have 2 beautiful children. If you're willing, I want us to adopt them. If God blesses us with more children in the future, that would be wonderful. But if not, we'll raise your twins together, as our own. Oma could hardly believe what she was hearing. The man she thought she would lose forever was offering her a new life, one she had never imagined. A weight lifted from her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt free. Do you mean it? She asked, her voice trembling with hope. Mr. Charles nodded. Yes, Oma. I love you, and I want to build a life with you and the twins. We can face this together. Overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, Oma threw her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me another chance. The next morning, Oma woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. She had finally unburdened herself of the secret that had weighed her down for so many years. Now it was time to reclaim her children. She boarded the earliest bus to her aunt's house, determined to put an end to Aunt Serah's manipulation once and for all. When she arrived, Aunt Serah opened the door with a smug look on her face, assuming that Oma had been thrown out of her husband's house. She was confident her plan had succeeded. Ah, Oma, she said, pretending to be concerned. I thought you'd be back sooner. How did it go? Did Charles throw you out? Oma's gaze was steady and unflinching. No, Aunt Serah, she replied firmly. I came here to take my children. Mr. Charles has adopted them, and we're going to raise them together as a family. Aunt Sarah's smug expression vanished, replaced by shock. What? You're taking them, but how? Oma stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. I told him the truth, everything, and he still chose to stay with me. We don't need your help anymore, Aunt Serah. We're a family now. Aunt Serah's mouth opened and closed in disbelief. She tried to backtrack, her voice suddenly pleading. Oma, you must understand. I didn't mean any harm. I only wanted the best for you. Oma shook her head. No, Aunt Serah. You used me. You blackmailed me. You took advantage of my situation and I let you, but no more. I forgive you for everything, but you will not be a part of my life from this point on. Aunt Serah's face crumbled. She realized too late that her greed had cost her everything. Please, Oma, forgive me, she begged. I was wrong. Don't shut me out. I've already forgiven you, Oma said softly, but I won't allow you to control me anymore. Goodbye, Aunt Serah. With that, Oma collected her twins and left her aunt's house. As she boarded the bus with her children, she felt as if she was finally leaving behind the years of pain and lies that had clouded her life. She was free. When Oma returned home with the twins, Mr. Charles welcomed them with open arms. The children, who had known Aunt Serah as their caregiver, were a little confused at first, but they quickly grew fond of Mr. Charles. His warmth and kindness made them feel safe, and soon they began to see him as their father. The house was filled with laughter and joy once again, and Oma felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. Mr. Charles treated the twins like his own, guiding them with love and care. Their family felt whole and complete in a way that Oma had never thought possible. Every day, she was grateful for the chance to build this new life with him, free from the lies and secrets of the past. As time went on, Mr. Charles and Oma continued to try for a child of their own. They visited doctors, explored treatments, and prayed for a miracle. But through it all, they never let their inability to conceive define their happiness. Whether or not they had more children, they knew they already had a family filled with love. Oma no longer lived in the shadows of her past. The secret that had once weighed her down became a testament to her resilience. She had learned to forgive herself and embrace the life she had, rather than the one she had lost. The twins thrived under her care, and Mr. Charles's guidance only strengthened the bond they shared. In the months following the confrontation, Aunt Serah tried repeatedly to reach out to Oma. She called, sent messages, and even tried visiting. Each time, her voice was filled with regret and desperation. Please, Oma, she would say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I just want to be a part of your life again. But Oma remained firm. She had forgiven her aunt, but she knew that allowing Aunt Serah back into her life would only invite more manipulation and pain. Her future was with Mr. Charles and the twins. Her family had become her priority, and she could not risk the peace they had built together. Oma's heart ached for the woman who had once cared for her, but she understood that forgiveness did not mean opening the door to toxic relationships again. She wished Aunt Serah well but kept her distance, choosing to protect the life and family she had worked so hard to create. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more interesting and captivating tales. Stay tuned